Theology is one of my hobbies. I've been asked how I landed on that hobby a few times. It is not my only hobby, though it is the only hobby that I do a blog about. I wish I could find more people that did theology as a hobby locally. It is a lonely feeling not to have a hobby I can share. I've tried getting into other hobbies, like music, but I have hearing damage. Listening to music is too much work for too little enjoyment to really be a hobby. So that means that my choices are to drive around in total silence, or listen to lectures and audiobooks. The voices in my head can be rather vicious if I allow them too much freedom, so lectures and audiobooks it is. There are several subjects that I really enjoy listening to. At one point in my past, I thought my professional life would be wrapped up in computers. While my practical skills are more than 20 years out of date, there was a time when I had written compilers and interpreters for programming languages that I invented, and I still write scripts in JavaScript occasionally when I need to extract data from a document. For example, in my open-source translation of the sacred scriptures, I needed to extract the data from various sources into Google Sheets. I wrote some JavaScript programs to read the XML, extract the data, and format it in a way that will be compatible with my needs. I like keeping abreast of recent changes in the field and techniques that are used by real programmers. So I do have subscriptions to a few YouTube channels related to computer programming. I also occasionally get an ebook related to the history of computers. I don't think I could be hired for a programming project the way I am, but I am still able to engage in intelligent conversation with professional programmers, or at least more than the average end user. My first love was always physics, but I lack the math chops to really make a career out of it. At least with computers, I could depend on someone else to write the appropriate equation and I could depend on the computer to calculate it. All I had to do was translate from math to C++ or Java or whatever programming language I was working in. So while I do still enjoy listening to a lecture on the latest developments in artificial intelligence or even basic techniques to apply programming theories and algorithms, I waited with bated breath as Fermilab did a live stream releasing the results of the G-2 experiment. I'm excited to see over the next few decades how the difference in predicted and measured magnetic moment for the muon changes the standard model of particle physics. I anticipate that the improvements will be minor and that the technology changes will be negligible, but that's what they said before Einstein proposed relativity regarding the difference between predicted and measured orbits of Mercury. That said, I won't be the one to propose a theory to reconcile these differences because the math is very complicated and I do it wrong every time I try. That does bring us around to another subject that I enjoy, the history of knowledge. This brings with it a healthy respect for pure philosophy and logic. I love to read about what people knew, when they knew it, and how they figured it out. For example, there is rather famously no year zero. There are only BC or BCE dates, and AD or CE dates, and all of them are natural numbers. This is because at the time of Dionysius in the 6th century, the number zero was still philosophically controversial. If you accept that zero is a useful mathematical concept, you're a mathematical liberal. It wouldn't be until Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi in the 9th century that zero would become mainstream. It's easy to think that a subject like mathematics is now settled, but 11 years ago when Numberphile released a video about the sum of all natural numbers being -1/12, it kicked off a series of replies trying to explain how either this is incomplete, inaccurate or unsettled, from other math YouTubers including Mathologer, Black Pen Red Pen, and 3 Blue 1 Brown. Mathematics is still a developing field of study even after more than 3,000 years of deep, dedicated study, just like physics and biology and astronomy and so many other fields of study. Somehow, even though every other field of study has recognized its need for development, there's a set of theologians that at least act like theology was handed down correctly once and never needed any changes. As if the God of their theological system is different from the God that created the other area of study, and therefore the world. Unfortunately for them, the history of theological development shows something else entirely. In my study of the development of knowledge, theology stands as an anomaly. Development in many areas of study moves slowly, and the slowness of development is often seen as a feature, not a bug. It is only when corporations find a way to make money in a field that the field really begins to move quickly. When Edison and his generation began to make money by moving electricity around, all of a sudden it started to really matter whether Einstein or Bohr were more accurate in their description of the electron. Engineers would be hired and promoted according to how quickly, accurately, and cheaply they could design an electric device to do a particular thing. How well they could do that was based partly on how closely their intuition about which physicist was correct matched reality. This gives physics and those fields of study most directly and closely upstream from this field a pride of place among venture capitalists. That doesn't mean that they were more right or more important than any other field of study though. Until relatively recently, studies in biology would typically take decades to go from a successful experiment in a laboratory and working, safe changes in medicine. A famous example of this was the discovery of genetics by Mendel, which remained dormant for decades before being rediscovered independently by multiple other researchers. This time frame was hardly touched by pouring in more money. Recent advancements in artificial intelligence and streamlining of bureaucracy associated with the COVID-19 pandemic have helped a little with that, but not enough to warrant the kind of pride of place for biologists that physicists enjoy. Changes by biologists have more directly led to the improvement in life, longevity, and luck for more people than the physics-based scientists and engineers by far. So it isn't that the fields that lead to improvements are the ones that get the most study. This is just one example of how pitting different fields of study against each other as more or less important is foolish, and examples could be provided going the other way and between these fields and other fields stretching on to infinity, but I think this is enough to make that point. Two areas of study stood out to me as particularly anomalous regarding the speed of their development: physics as I've just described, and theology. I enjoy these areas of study exactly because they are anomalies in the development of knowledge, and I want to more completely understand why. I've already explained why I think physics progresses so quickly. Physics proceeds anomalously fast because investments there make money. Biology gets a little boost from the medical field. Other fields, like mathematics, history and economics, proceed slowly. If those fields proceed slowly, though, theology proceeds at glacial speeds. Theology proceeds so slowly that many people think it doesn't proceed at all. Sometimes even theologians or theology-adjacent professionals like pastors don't think it progresses at all. This isn't true. There's a reason that a particular set of views on the message of the most prolific New Testament author is called the New Perspective. Dr. Michael Heiser was famous for his advancement of the ancient Near East perspective on the Bible. Dr. John Walton's views on the Pentateuch would have been unrecognizable to many theologians 2 centuries ago. Advancements do happen in theology. In some environments, there have been rapid advancements in theology. The most famous of these, of course, was the century following the Protestant Reformation. Not only Protestants, but Roman Catholics also had a period of rapid development in theology, and the exchange of ideas went both ways. I thought that might be a hint about what causes a field to develop more quickly: competition. That would explain physics and the periods that we see rapid development in theology. Physicists and those immediately upstream from them in mathematics compete to be right so they can be the ones making their venture capitalists money, and right after the Reformation there was a fierce competition between traditional and new ideas about God to demonstrate that their ideas actually work better for society. That doesn't seem to explain it all though. In the USA through the 20th and 21st centuries there is a very free market of religious ideas, and it hasn't led to a proliferation of long-lived theological innovation. There has been some innovation, but it tends, in general, to be either short-lived and inconsistent or very slow and subject to extreme scrutiny. As I've looked at the history of theology, I've started to notice something about the way theological studies have changed since the times of more rapid theological progress. I wonder if these changes are behind the slowing of theological development. There was a time when the best theologians drew from the best professionals of their own time, across all fields of study. Famously, Augustine and Origen drew from Plato and Aristotle. Thomas Aquinas drew from Muslim philosophers. Erasmus drew in ideas from his linguistic studies to guide his theological thoughts. Even after the Reformation, Calvin incorporated what he read from the Church Fathers and classical philosophers and his legal studies into his theological studies. However, as time has gone on, there has been a shift in theology. It's hard for me to put a time or a person or a place to it exactly, but something in the way theologians handle the truths they seek has changed. There is a definite skepticism for any ideas that draw from extra-religious sources, to the extent that many religious leaders and thinkers come across as wholly ignorant of other fields, even when they aren't. I see this in comments on my own writing. Many of the analogies and ideas that really resonated with our ancestors don't mean the same thing, or sometimes anything, to my contemporaries. The analogies of old were grounded in experiences and educational exercises common to the day they were written in, analogies of monarchy, maternity, and material science that are not the common experience of my peers. However, by reading those thinkers in their own context, putting in the study, and understanding what they're really trying to say, I'm able to provide analogies that seem to accomplish the same function that are common to those I meet in the modern world. The reaction among those who worship their god of conservatism is astounding. I've been called a heretic, a liberal, and a deceiver. One of my favorite exercises when I receive such a criticism is to ask what precisely my error is, and they can almost never tell me. They simply start from a place of believing any analogy they've never heard before must be in error. There are also more formal examples. One of the dogmas in the Roman Catholic Church is transubstantiation, which is the belief that the substance of the Eucharistic elements are changed even though the accidents are not. The problem is that the definition of what qualifies as the substance and what qualifies as accident changes with the prevailing science, such that the substance is always just out of reach of the current science and the accidents is all science will ever be able to measure. Protestants don't fare any better. The definitions of inerrant and preserved, as applied to the Bible, are under a similar and similarly constant adjustment as new discoveries are made. Any criticism of these ideas is met with condemnation and certainty of damnation. That's the conclusion I've come to. I think the reason that theology has slowed to such a crawl is because any updates to belief are met with the threat of eternal damnation. Somewhere along the line, whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent, the judge of the earth and creator of the universe, that is the God of the Bible, was equated with the God called conservatism. When that happened, anything new or innovative, even if it is actually quite old or a return to form, is a sin against conservatism, and that is the sin that cannot be forgiven. I do know that this change is less than a few hundred years old. You can see this in the naming of theories that touch on other subjects. Even though the realization that the Earth is not the center of the solar system was a difficult lesson for some Bible students at that time, there never was a time when a special name was employed by those who placed their trust in Christ and followed the academic consensus regarding gravity. In the modern era, we do have the special named category of theistic evolutionists, for those who have placed their trust in Christ and simultaneously follow the academic consensus regarding biology. Their sins against conservatism are noted, proclaimed, and condemned by those who are proud to call themselves conservatives. These conservatives think that their brand of theology is special. Slogans like infallibility and inerrancy and traditional take on their most extreme forms, and theological correctness is measured by how uniform an idea is with the perceived opinions of our forefathers and how devoutly we hold to the slogans that they created to handle the problems particular to their day. Personally, I have yet to see a convincing argument that Yahweh is the same as conservatism. Certainly, there are times when Yahweh cooperates with the conservatives. It's somewhat hidden because what was conservative then and what's conservative now have changed a lot, but looking back on it from our vantage in the future, it seems that the consideration to continue offering animal sacrifices through the priestly family and the patrilineal landholding were conservative ideas that God allowed despite their limitations. Also, God's opposition to establishing a kingly dynasty and insistence on a single temple, even when the kingdom was divided, can be seen as conservative in their contexts. However, there are also times when God invokes a change that the people weren't prepared for, invoking policies that were definitely liberal in their own context. The establishment of Sabbath was something that the Jewish people were criticized for. Allowing their servants 4 days off per month was insane, and was so difficult to establish that it needed to be enforced through execution. When Jesus changed the sacrifice to a remembrance of him and circumcision to baptism, this was a liberal approach at the time. So I do not see the God of the Bible equated with either conservatism or liberalism. In reality, both conservatism and liberalism are tools we can use to serve God or to rebel against him. I'm reminded of the parable of the fences. There once were two sister towns, such that the border between them was a single street called Division St. The houses on one side of Division St were in West Terrace, and the houses on the other side were in East Terrace. A fence ran perpendicular to Division Street, dividing both towns in half the other way. It divided streets, parks, and suburbs. While there were regular gates in the fence, it was still inconvenient to most people at least some of the time. The fence had been there for generations. No one remembered why the fence was originally built. The East Terrace City Council talked and considered and ran surveys and interviewed citizens for 15 years, during which time no reason to keep the fence was ever found. There was a population of bears that avoided the fence, but they were all the way on the other side of West Terrace and wouldn't notice a change in East Terrace. Then they finally decided to take down their half of the fence. Economic prosperity followed as it became easier to move through the town. West Terrace observed these changes and in one night decided to take down their half of the fence. Immediately a new migration path for the group of angry bears opened up, and when bears that used to go around the town so as to circumnavigate the fence started going through town, instead the town fell to ruin. The bears started moving through town easily, attacking the citizens and causing havoc and property damage. A study was ordered, and the fence rebuilt after the study was completed, but it took 5 years for some of the bears to realize they couldn't go straight through anymore. This demonstrates that neither conservatism nor liberalism are really the best. East Terrace would have benefited sooner if they had not resisted change, but West Terrace was hurt by quickly making changes without studying the consequences. What's best is to study every matter closely and find the root meaning, then act accordingly as soon as you have the answers. Sometimes things are the way they are for a reason. Sometimes change is good. I'm going to say a few things here that will be controversial, but shouldn't be. I want to get everything right that the apostles got right, and everything that deep study shows that they got wrong I want to correct. I want to do everything right that the generations before me did right, and everything that deep study shows that they did wrong I want to correct. I want to get everything right that the church fathers got right, and everything that deep study shows that they got wrong I want to correct. I want to get everything right that the reformers got right, and everything that deep study shows that they got wrong I want to correct. I want to get everything right that the founding fathers got right, and everything that deep study shows that they got wrong I want to correct. I want to get everything right that the conservatives get right, and everything that deep study shows that they get wrong I want to correct. I want to get everything right that the liberals get right, and everything that deep study shows that they get wrong I want to correct. I want my children and those who follow me to get everything right that I get right, and everything that deep study reveals me to get wrong, I want them to correct. God is never equated with conservatism. God is equated with some things though. Christ tells us that He is the way, the truth, and the life. John tells us that God is love. Proverbs connects God and wisdom. He is called the judge of all in Hebrews, and king of all in Psalms. He is called light, both as Christ and as God. He's called a fire. He is called our refuge and our strength. If He really is all of these things, then deep study will only reveal more about Him, and only the false God conservatism needs to fear deep study. All too often I get the feeling that many people on that side of the church have replaced the God of the Bible with the God conservatism. I would be more inclined to think differently if some of them were equally eager to protect life, love, wisdom, and truth, to submit themselves to other authorities for judgment regarding their exploration of truth even when their favorite political leaders weren't dedicated to truth. Instead, any opposition to the ends of the favorite political party is labeled liberal, and treated as heresy. When I see conservative pastors stand up and say when and where the conservative political leaders and ideals have gone wrong, then I know that they serve Yahweh rather than conservatism. In a related way, I know that a liberal pastor serves Yahweh rather than liberalism when they stand up and say when and where the liberal political leaders and ideals have gone wrong. I would rather be a liberal Christian on the side of God than a conservative in opposition to God, and as I've already pointed out, if you cannot see God supporting innovation, then you are not worshiping the God of the Bible. So with that, I'm going to issue a challenge to my friends who identify as Christian. Take one of those online quizzes that identify you as conservative or liberal, and tell me the answer. Then, tell me a way that you think the politicians and or ideals on your side have gone off the mark. Don't say a Wazel way that you're more conservative than the average conservative or more liberal than the average liberal. Tell me where your side is wrong and the other side is right. I was originally going to give my own for my side, but when I took the text I ended up dead center. So I'll give examples for each. On the liberal side, the religious fervor against guns is baffling to me, and not supported by the data. On the conservative side, the worship of national icons such as the flag or borders is idolatrous, and burning a flag someone buys with their own money is no worse than burning any other piece of fabric they bought themselves. Now it's your turn. Where do you stand on the scale? And what has your side gotten wrong?